In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
Tonight we're going to talk about the clash between causal necessity and human freedom. It was taken up by a lot of writers back in the day. One we're going to be talking about the most tonight is Thomas Hobbes, and the liberty, necessity, and chance, freedom to do what we want. But he also had a dialogue with this guy, Dr. John Bramhill. So Hobbes's point is he argues that I am free to do something when I can do it, if I so will. And this kind of freedom we indisputably have, whether or not there is some chain of prior causes that necessitates our willingness to do so. Well, Bramhill, by contrast, says that true freedom cannot coexist with necessity. To be truly free, our actions must proceed from a genuinely independent elective power of the rational will. Unless our wills are themselves free and independent, an act which proceeds from our will, there are no more free than a staff in a man's hand. Well, Hobbes's position, it is enough that we have what is sometimes called the liberty of spontaneity, the ability to do X without the hindrance, interference, or obstruction when we want X, whatever X may be. Bramhill would have went on to say that in order to be free, we must have the liberty of indifference on an absolute contra-casual or two-way power to choose X or not X, the power to do or to forbear, as Bramhill would have put it. And then the last little bit of exchange we have, if you don't, we're going to get into some Matrix level stuff here, specifically, I guess, what is it, the second one? Where Neo and the mayor of the town or whatever are talking about the machinery level. And he was like, yeah, of course, we could just shut these machines down. You know, we have total control over these machines, but there's a causality, because if they shut the machines down, what's going to purify their water and process their sewage, et cetera, et cetera. So who's causing what on to whom? So that's the kind of discussion I believe we're going to be getting into tonight. So the last exchange I'm going to talk about is Bramhill fears that if it is accepted that we are causally determined to will as we do, then all responsibility for action will be undermined. The example he uses is no one blames a fire for burning the city, yet if the will of man be not its own disposition, he is no more a free agent than the fire. And Hobbes replies that the blame is still appropriate in the human race, or the human case, since it is an expression of disapproval which may be effective in modifying people's attitudes. For example, by making people ask forgiveness when they hurt us. So we're in for an interesting one. Thank you for oh, wait, shit, hold on, I didn't even do this yet.
The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Please note the explicit content indicator. This means that I use adult language. I do not speak in a humorless public radio hushed monotone, I am excited and enthusiastic about the information that I present and the topics I discuss. You will hear ice rattle in my glass throughout the show. On the show, I joke about bodily functions, sex acts, religion, and politics. The topics may seem random or scattered through the back catalog. A list of show topics in chronological order is provided on the featured topic link at Advertise.com. If any of these issues might trigger you, this might not be the podcast for you, and I wish you good luck finding a show more to your liking. It's that time again. The music is low. The party is over. The fire is dying down. And all the ordinary people passed out long ago. Now we are the only ones left. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We're doing Western Philosophy Wednesday. Let's see. There's some stuff I wanted to talk about before we get started. There's a new blog on the website. There's a whole new resources section on the website. You go to Advertise.com, and under resources, there's the indispensable book list, which is brand new, and a blog. It's got some posts on it already. It's going to be fun, and if you're interested in contributing or writing some shit down for the blog, just shoot me an email. Or message me on social media or whatever. I'm pretty open to any amount of help I can get for that. The indispensable books list is it's a pretty good foundation for right now. I'll be adding to it as we go along. I think more stuff that needs to be on there, but it's pretty solid. I mean, right now it's pretty good. It's nothing that's on there is going to surprise any listeners of the show, by the way. Merch. There's a new merch section. I got some Abercast shirts out there for sale. Check those out. And I guess that's about it. Let's get started. So what do we got here this evening is actually a debate from these two dudes that I was talking about. Thomas Hobbs, who is a philosopher, and Dr. John Bramhill, who is the Bishop of Derry. Yeah, so I'll try to call out who's saying what as we go. All right, yeah, so check out the new stuff on the website. Consider supporting the show on Patreon and Subscribestar. The new the March 2020 Fellowcraft episode is up, and we're finishing our dissection of Milton William Cooper's UFO conspiracy work. Bill Cooper. Literally, I think that is all that I have to say now. Okay, so Bramhill starts. So shots fired. Bramhill says, either I am free to write this discourse for liberty against necessity, or I am not free. If I be free, I have proved my point and ought not to suffer for the truth. If I be not free, yet I ought not to be blamed, since I do it not out of any voluntary choice, but out of an inevitable necessity. Hobbes says, allow me to retort. The preface is a handsome one, but it appears even in that he has mistaken the question. For whereas he says, if I be free to write this discourse, I have proved my point. Deny that to be true. If he will prove his point, he must prove that before he wrote it. It was not necessary he should write it afterwards. It may be he thinks it is it all one thing to say if I was free to write it, and if it was not necessary, I should write it. But I think otherwise, for he is free to do a thing who may do it if he have the will to do it, and may forbear if he have the will to forbear. And yet, if there is a necessity that he shall have the will to do it, the action is necessarily to follow. And if there be a necessity that he shall have the will to forbear, and forbearing also will be necessary. The question, therefore, is not whether a man is a free agent, that is to say, whether he can write or forbear, speak or be silent according to his will, but whether the will to write and the will to forbear come upon him according to his will or according to anything else in his own power. I acknowledge this liberty that I can do if I will. But to say I can will if I will is to be an absurd speech. Wherefore I cannot grant him the point upon this preface. Bramhill continues. That is no true necessity, which he calls necessity, nor that liberty, which he calls liberty. To clarify this, it behooves us to know the difference between these three: necessity, spontaneity, and liberty. Necessity and spontaneity may sometimes meet together. So may spontaneity and liberty. But real necessity and true liberty can never meet together. Some things are necessary and not voluntary or spontaneous, and some things are both necessary and voluntary, and some things are voluntary and not free, for things are both voluntary and free. And those things which are truly necessary can never be free. And those things which are truly free can never be necessary. Necessity consists in an antecedent determination. Spontaneity consists in a conformity of the appetite, either intellectual or sensitive, to the object. And true liberty consists of an elective power of the rational will. That which is determined without my concurrence may nevertheless agree well enough with my fancy desires and obtain any subsequent consent. But that which is determined without my concurrence or consent cannot be the object of my choice. I may like that which is inevitably imposed upon me by another, but if it be inevitably imposed upon me by extrinsical causes, it is both folly for me to deliberate and impossible for me to choose whether I shall undergo it or not. Reason is the root, the foundation, the origin of true liberty, which judges and represents to the will whether this or that be convenient, whether this or that be more convenient. Judge then what a pretty kind of liberty it is which is maintained by Hobbes, such a liberty as is in little children before they have the use of reason. Shots fired. Before they can consult or deliberate of anything. Is not this a childish liberty? And such a liberty as in brute beasts, as bees and spiders, which do not learn their faculties as we do our trades, but experience and consideration. This is a brutish liberty. Such a liberty as a bird has to fly when her wings are clipped, or such a liberty as the lame man who has lost the use of his limbs has to walk. Is it not this a ridiculous liberty? Lastly, such a liberty as a river has to descend down the channel. What will ascribe liberty to an inanimate creature also, which have neither reason nor spontaneity, nor so much as sensitive appetites? Such is Hobbes's liberty. Hobbes retorts. Allow me to retort. Hobbes. I did expect that for the knowing of the difference between necessity, spontaneity, and liberty, he would not have set down their definitions, for without these, their difference cannot possibly appear. For how can a man know of things differ unless he knows first what they are? He tells us that necessity and spontaneity may meet together, and spontaneity and liberty, but necessity and liberty never. I note only this, that spontaneity is a word not used in common English. And they that understand Latin know that it means no more than an appetite or a will. And it is not found but in living creatures. In seeing, he says that necessity and spontaneity may stand together. It may say also that necessity and will may stand together. And then is not the will free, as he would have it from necessitation. And I do not understand how reason can be the root of true liberty. If the bishop, as he says in the beginning, had the liberty to write this discourse. I understand how objects and the conveniences and inconveniences of them may be represented to a man by the help of his senses, but how reason represents anything to the will, I understand no more than the bishop understands how there may be liberty in children and in beasts and inanimate creatures. For he seems to wonder how children may be left at liberty, how beasts in prisons may set at liberty, and how a river may have a free course. And say, what will he ascribe liberty to an inanimate creature also? And thus he thinks that he has made it clear how necessity, spontaneity, and liberty differ from one another. If the reader find it so, I am contented. All right, here we go. The bishop says, his necessity is a necessity upon supposition arising from the concourse of all the causes, including the last dictate of the understanding in reasonable creatures. The adequate cause and the effect are together in time. When all the concurrent causes are determined, the effect is determined also, and is become so necessary that it is actually in being. There is a great difference between determining and being determined. If all the collateral causes concurring to the production of an effect were antecedently determined as to what they must of necessity produce, and when they must produce it, when there is no doubt that the effect is necessary. Hobbes says, the bishop might have easily have seen that the necessity I hold is the same necessity that he denies, namely a necessity of things future. We always talk about this, right? It's the potential. It is the antecedent necessity derived from the very beginning of time, and that I put necessity for an impossibility of not being. And that impossibility as well as the possibility are never truly said, but of the future. And I know as well as he that the cause, when it is adequate, as he calls it, or entire, as I call it, is together in time with the effect. But for all that, the necessity may be and is before the effect, as much as necessity can be. And although he call it a necessity of supposition, it is no more so than all other necessity is. The fire burns necessarily, but not without supposition. And there is fuel to put to it, and burns the fuel when it is put to it necessarily. But it is by supposition that the ordinary cause of nature is not hindered. The good bishop continues. That which Hobbes makes the question is not the question. The question is not, says he, whether a man may write if he will and forbear if he will, but whether the will to write or the will to forbear come upon him according to his will, or according to anything else in his power. Here is the distinction without a difference. But his will to do not come upon him according to his will, then he is not a free or yet so much a voluntary agent, which is Hobbes's liberty. Certainly, all the freedom of the agent is from the freedom of the will. If the will have no power over itself, the agent is no more free than a staff in a man's hand. Secondly, he makes but an empty show of power in the will, either to write or not to write. Hobbes, he has very little reason to say this. I mean, we're changing the speaker. Hobbes now says he has very little reason to say this. He requested me to tell him my opinion in writing concerning free will, which I did. And I did let him know a man was free of those things that were in his power to follow his will, but that he was not free to will. This is that his will did not follow his will. Wow. Woo. Which I express in these words. The question is whether the will to write or the will to forbear come upon a man according to his will, or according to anything else in his own power. He that cannot understand the difference between free to do if he will and free to will is not fit, as I have said in the stating of the question, to hear this controversy disputed, much less to be a writer in it, his consequence. If a man be not free to will, he is not free nor a voluntary agent. And his saying the freedom of the agent is from the freedom of the will is put here without proof for why. He never before had heard, I believe, of any distinction between free to do and free to will, which makes him also say, if the will have not power over itself and the agent no more free than a staff in the man's hand, as if he were not freedom enough for man to do what he will, unless his will also have power over his will, and that his will be not the power itself, it's a potential, but must have another power within it to do all of these voluntary acts. So there's a lot of will talk here. This is something that we're used to. So this reminds me a lot of, you know what I'm about to fucking say. This reminds me of Liber 3, right? Where Crowley's talking about riding in a chariot and it being drawn by three beasts. And these three beasts are being driven by one single whip. And the whip in this equation is the will. The man must know himself in order to do what he will, because that's the whole of the law. But as the master Therion has told us, that doesn't mean do whatever you want. Your will must be focused and driven like these three beasts, right? So this is all very interesting. I'm just going to take a note of this real fast. All right, I'll be right back.
Welcome to Haunting History, the podcast that reaches back into the past for the events that shocked us. Tales of true crime, mystery, and the macabre. And when we're lucky, those stories where the past and the paranormal meet. Because who doesn't love a good ghost story, right? I'm your host, Kat, and joining me every week will be one of my co-hosts. Either Haley, my partner in every idea I have, or Tress, my lovely sidekick in all things paranormal. Join us this season as we discuss and share true accounts from all over Southern California and beyond, from haunted locations to newsworthy incidents and crimes that stunned us. We will dwell deep and find the people behind the headlines. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Haunting History Podcast, and rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen. Also, visit our website at hauntinghistorypodcast.com. Until next time, remember, the living are far scarier than any ghost.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
All right, so Bramhill goes on here, and he says, if he be precisely and inevitably determined in all occurrences whatsoever, what a man shall will, and what he shall not will, that he shall write, and what he shall not write. To what purpose is this power? God and nature never made anything in vain, but vain and empty is the power which never was and never shall be led into action. Either the agent is determined before he acts, and then he shall will, and what he shall not will, and what shall act, and what he shall not act, and then he is no more free to act than he is to will. So it sounds kind of like, it's unlike Crowley. Bramhill sounds like he's kind of like, just do whatever you want. Does that sound right to you? God, sometimes I'm like, I'm not deep enough for all this philosophy. More free to act than he is to will, or else he is not determined. And then there is no necessity. No effect can exceed the virtue of its cause. And the action be free to write or to forbear, the power or faculty to will, and not must of necessity be more free. If the will be determined, the writing or not the writing is likely determined. And then he should say, he may not write as he may forbear, but he must write or he must forbear. And thirdly, this answer contradicts the sense of all the world, that the will of man is determined without his will, or without anything in his power. Why do we ask men whether they will do such a thing or not? Why do we represent reasons to them? Why do we pray them? Why do we entreat them? Why do we blame them if their will come not upon them according to their will? And easily might the answer be according to Hobbes' doctrine, alas, blame not us. Our wills are not in our own power or disposition. If they were, we could thankfully embrace so great a favor. All right, we're switching to Hobbes. To what purpose is this power, he asks. It is to this purpose that all those things may be brought to pass which God has from eternity predetermined. It is therefore to no purpose here to say that God and nature have made nothing in vain, but see that weak arguments he brings next, which though answered and that which has gone before, yet if I answer not again, he will say that they are too hot for my fingers. One is, and it's like if the agent be determined what he shall will and what he shall act, then he is no more free to act than he is to will. As if the will being necessitated, the doing of what we will were not liberty. Another is, if a man be free to act, he is much more free to will, because no effect can be exceeded by the virtue of its cause. As if he should say, if I make him angry, then I am more angry. And the third is, if I will be determined when the writing is determined, and he ought not to say he may write, but he must write. It is true, it follows that he must fucking write. But if it does not follow, I ought to say that he must write unless he would have me say more than I know, as himself often does in this reply. After his arguments come his difficult question. If the will of man be determined without his will or without anything in his power, why do we ask men whether they will do such a thing or not? I answer because we desire to know and cannot know but by their telling, or then neither. For the most part, why do we represent reason to them, and why do we pray them, and why do we entreat them? I answer because thereby we think to make them have the will they have not. But why do we blame them? I answer because they please us not. I might ask him whether blaming be anything else but saying that the thing blamed is ill or imperfect. May we not say a horse is lame, though his lameness came from necessity. Wow. Or that a man is a fool or a knave if he be so, though he could not help it. How easily might they answer according to Hobbes's doctrine, alas, blame us not our wills, and not in our own power. And I answer that they are to be blamed through their wills, be not in their own power. Is not good, good, and evil, evil, although they may not be in our power, and shall not call them so. And is not the praise and blame, but it seems the bishop takes blame, not for the dispraise of a thing, but for the pretext and color of malice and revenge against him he blames. And where he says our wills are in our power, he sees not that he speaks absurdly, for he ought to say, the will is the power. All right, now it's Bramhill's turn. This is the belief of all mankind, which we have not learned from our tutors. But it is imprinted in our hearts by nature. We need not turn over any obscure books to find out this truth. The poets chant it in the theatres. The shepherds in the mountains, the pastors teach it in the churches, the doctors in the universities, the common people in the markets, and all mankind and the whole world do assent unto it, except a handful of men who have poisoned their intellects in the paradoxical principles, the necessity which Hobbes has devised, which is grounded upon the necessitation of man's will without his will, the worst of all others, and is so far from lessening those difficulties and absurdities which flow from the fatal destiny of the Stoics. It is increases them and renders them unanswerable. So I'm sorry if my voice is weird. I think I'm having problems with my headphones again. God damn it. I thought that I had this straightened out. What the fuck is going on? God, I'm going to need to buy some new goddamn headphones. Please consider supporting the show so I can buy some new fucking headphones. Hobbes retorts, this guy just slammed the Stoics. The Stoics are like our bros. We've been reading about the Stoics. I mean, do you even Epictetus, bro? All right, Hobbes. It's Hobbes' turn here. It is true, very few have learned... God, this headphone thing is driving me crazy. Deep breath. It is true, very few have learned from tutors that man is not free to will, nor do they find it in much books. They find in books that which their poets chant, and in their theaters, in their shepherds, in their mountains, in which the pastors teach in the churches and the doctors in the universities, and that which the common people in the markets and all mankind in the whole world do assent unto, is the same that I assent unto, namely, that a man has freedom to do if he will, but whether he has the freedom to will is question, which it seems neither the bishop nor they ever thought on. Bramhill. No man blames the fire for burning whole cities. No man taxes poison for destroying men. Wait, yes, they fucking do. I pay a tax on every bottle of booze I buy. If you smoke cigarettes, you get taxed on the poison that you're being killed with. But those persons who apply them to such wicked ends, if the will of man be not his own disposition, he is no more a free agent than the fire or the poison. 3 things are required to make an act or omission culpable. First, that it be in our power to perform or forbear it. Secondly, that we be obliged to perform it or forbear it, respectively. Third, that we omit that which we ought to have done or which we ought to have omitted. Hobbes. Here again, he is upon his arguments from blame, which I have answered before. And we do as much blame as we do men, for which we say fire hath done hurt and poison hath killed a man, and as well as we say the man hath done unjustly. But we do not seek to be revenged of the fire and the poison, because we cannot make them ask forgiveness, as we would make men do when they hurt us. So the blaming of the one and the other, that is the declaring of the hurt or evil action done by them. This seems like a very clear beginning of like victimhood culture that we are being consumed with right now. As long as I'm hurt, you owe me an apology. Meh. Is the same in both, but the malice of a man is only against a man. Are you assuming my species, bro? Bramhill says, so my preface remains yet unanswered. Either I was extrinsically and inevitably predetermined to write this discourse without any concurrence of mine in the determination, and without any power in me to change or oppose it, or I was not so predetermined. If I was, then I ought not to be blamed. For no man is justly blamed for doing that which never was in his power to shun. If I was not so predetermined, then mine actions and my will to act are neither compelled or necessitated by any extrinsical causes. But I elect and I choose either to write or not, or to forbear, according to my own will and mine own power. And when I have resolved and elected it, but necessity of supposition, which may and does consist with true liberty, not a real antecedent necessity, the 2 horns of this dilemma are so straight that no mean can be given, nor room to pass between them. And the 2 consequences are so evident that instead of answering, he is forced to decline them. It was just like a rap battle. What year was this? All right, I don't know what year these were written, but this was initially, it looks like published. It was initially published in Questions Concerning Liberty and Necessity and Chance in 1654. So this is like a rap battle in 1654. That's what this looked like. All right, this is the final This is the final bit. Hobbes answers this, and this is the final part of it. That which he says is the preface is that if he be not free to write this discourse, he ought not to be blamed, but if he be free, he hath obtained the cause. The first consequence I should have granted him, if he had written it rationally and civilly, the latter I deny, and have shown that he ought to have proved that a man is free to will, for which he says anything else whatsoever would think if it were moved and did not know what moved it. A wooden top that is lashed by the boys and run about, sometimes to one wall, sometimes to another, sometimes spinning, sometimes hitting men in the shins, if it were sensible of its own motion, would think it proceeded from its own will, unless it felt what lashed it. And is a man any wiser when he runs to one place for a benefice, to another for a bargain, and troubles the world with writing errors and requiring answers because he thinks he does it without others causing or cause than his own will, and sees not what are the lashings that cause his will. All right, that was a difficult read of different time, different vernacular. I am John, and this has been the Abercast. What did I call it? Western Philosophy Wednesday. Maybe I should make a new T-shirt. Maybe I should make a "Do You Even Epictetus, Bro" T-shirt. I think that would be funny, right? So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I think I feel that it is an honor to be invited. I just lost a whole rock. I think it's an honor to be invited into your earphones to help you get through your Wednesday or your week. If you have any thoughts about this, I'm kind of lukewarm on this one. I think the banter was Hobbes's banter was like my favorite part of it. Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, will. It's all about the will, bro. That's my jam lately, right? So, I'm John. This has been the Abercast. Please consider supporting the show. Sign into the newsletter for a bunch of bonus bullshit. And, yeah, here, Hilla will tell you all about it.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Abercast and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Abercast. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Abercast. the price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I'm proud of the Abercast, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you could sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going. Do you even Epictetus, bro?